Okay, hello everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to MiReKoc Wednesday Webinar Series. My name is Birce and I'm the coordinator and researcher at MiReKoc. Let me briefly introduce MiReKoc. MiReKoc is Migration Research Center at Koç University. It's based in Istanbul. MiReKoc was founded as a grant-giving program in 2004, providing funding for research on migration issues in Turkey and beyond. And over the past years, MiReKoc has become a hub for systematic research on migration in Turkey and its neighborhood, including the Mediterranean Basin, Europe, and the Middle East. We celebrated our 15-year anniversary in 2019 with an international conference on migration and development. Since our foundation, MiReKoc continues to be a multidisciplinary research institute on migration studies. And since February 2015, we organized Migration Seminar Series in order to get together with colleagues and migration experts, exchange ideas with MiReKoc members, and learn more about MiReKoc projects. And we also give feedbacks to dissertations, etc. So seminars usually take place bi-weekly on Wednesdays on the campus. Yet in this period, due to COVID-19 measures, the seminar series proceeds as webinar series via Zoom, and we will continue to host national and international colleagues. If you'd like to learn more about our work, research, and publications, please subscribe to our newsletter, and you may also visit our website at mirekoc.ku.edu.tr. Today is the fourth webinar of the spring 2021 period, so it's our great pleasure to have Rüya Yüksel here with us. Rüya, she recently finished her studies at the Graduate Center, CUNY, New York, working on how place branding is being used as a mode of urban governance, focusing on the verticalization of cities. Throughout her studies, she researched and wrote on the general roles of place branding through imagery and the idea of selling the dream and the disintegration of the cities, as well as integration of the city's residents, including migrants, on social and economic level. And prior to that, she completed her PhD in city branding, titled Toward an Understanding of an Inside-Out Perspective on City Branding, a grounded theory study of Leeds and Istanbul. Previously, she has also worked as an associate lecturer in Leeds Beckett University School of Strategy, UK, delivering courses on undergraduate, postgraduate, and MBA levels, as well as a brand consultant under EU funding. Rüya today will present her work titled Branding Cities and Implications on Migration and Diversity, and she will discuss the dynamics between city branding efforts, migration, and diversity. Again, we thank her for being with us today. Related to the format of the webinar, Rüya will present her research, and after that we'll have a QA session, but during the presentations you may start writing your questions, or you can ask directly by raising your hands during the QA session. I thank you all for joining us today. The floor is yours, Rüya. Thank you.
Thank you, Birce. Thank you for that introduction and the opportunity for me to present my research, and I will try and live up to that introduction. So today I want to talk about branding cities, implications, and implications on migration and diversity. Oh. Sorry, yeah. So a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about today is I'll start with city branding, what it is, what it entails, why are we talking about it more than before, should we even care, because it could be, or is it just another gimmick of, nowadays we market everything, and putting migration and diversity and city branding in one context. Then I will move on to talk about my research, and I will conclude with what the future looks like and the potential issues that arises. So we all have an idea of what a city looks like, what emotions evoke in us, what images we think of. These images and emotions and ideas of a city we might have come out from a point of view that we might have been exposed over a long period of time, either on traditional media such as print media or TV advertising, or even a place placing, because you would say product placing, but place placing. or it could be social reference groups from family and friends. And it could also be from other non-traditional media platforms, such as social media and so on. There's also the high, when it comes to cities, there's the highly imagery use of within poetry, literature, songs, and movies that constitute what a city image might mean for us. So, for instance, when we think of New York, we think of, or we vision Times Square, the yellow cabs, skyscrapers, or keywords like, Big Apple, the city that never sleeps. And we also think of the famous I Heart New York logo, which was actually owned by the New York State Department of Commerce and developed by an advertising agency. So in a way, branding places in any context is nothing new. We look at, I don't know, just think of Amsterdam and cute houses by the canal, small boats along, cycling, relatively a smaller city than the most vibrant red light district, or even the use of, or the free use of, or liberal use of cannabis. We think of Tokyo, endless crowds, lights everywhere, the famous Shibuya crossing with thousands of people on it, technology, in fact, high technology, modernity, again, skyscrapers. And we look at, Milan, just a few examples, like, stylish Milan, famous for its fashion week, Duomo di Milano, the famous cathedral that everyone probably has ever been to Milan, has a photo of it in their photo album. And with Milan, there's also the heritage of Italy. So there's the kind of national or national image or national heritage influence there as well. So this, in its very basic form, is what a place brand is to us, to the non-academia side of things. If you go into a bit deeper, by the way, I would like to note that throughout this presentation, I will be using place branding, the terms of place branding and city branding interchangeably, because it's the cities that we focus on here. Yeah. Unfortunately, there's a wide misconception of what a city brand is and what it might be. It's nothing new, though. Cities have been in constant search for an identity, or rather a story to tell, to communicate a part of their collective identity. It's not just a slogan. It's not just a promotion, imagery, advertising that we're looking at. The slogan and so on do not alone contribute or constitute a city brand, but rather, contribute towards it. So on the bigger picture, when we look at city branding, the concept manifests itself throughout the cracks of, say, globalization, how to position the city on a global map that would attract investment in competition to other cities, because now we live in a world of globalization where one city is not necessarily in a competition with the neighboring city, but also on the other side of the world. And we also talking about community engagement, available resources and policies to foster a collective identity, because community engagement encourages place attachment and our sense of belonging, which reflects to outsiders as pride and ownership of where we live. It also manifests itself through the social capital. Inequalities in terms of social infrastructure forms of segregation heavily influence a city's capacity to cope with crises. The availability of social resources and networks to individuals and support resources available that individuals can support and help each other strengthens, and these individuals are more likely to benefit from a cohesive social environment. And it is also manifesting itself through urban planning and gentrification, infrastructure within the urban, and the fair allocation of investment. For instance, in a previous city that I carried out, I looked at the verticalization process of New York. And it was, I mean, in most ways it was interesting, but at the same time not, considering New York City, that local government, how the local governments were over the moon by the idea of a new luxury high-rise building, a high-rise building targeting offshore buyers, instead of trying to come up with a solution for the city's ever-increasing housing and segregation issues. So, city branding is not a myth. More and more cities across the world are engaging in a competition. They're in a bid to attract not only tourists, because that was another misconception about city branding, that it would only a tourism thing, but also they need to attract new residents and businesses. And branding has been seen as a powerful management tool. And it is about shifting the focus from rational marketing interventions to selling an emotional association with the urban. So it's not just about the convenience of a geographical location, is not necessarily the only decision making the feature for a global company's headquarters, but it's also about what that city offers alongside of it. It's about creating a story and telling it to the world. This is fairly easy with the traditional sense of branding. If I were to explain, for instance, if it's something wrong with iPhone 10, there will soon be an iPhone 11 with a new packaging, with a new campaign, everything that's fresh about it, you know. But the complexity of cities, they don't have the luxury to rebrand, to rename, to repackage a city. So this sets a challenge, as unlike products, cities are complex and dynamic in nature, that serve different functions and purposes to a very diverse set of users, consumers, customers, inhabitants, and so on. So from a branding perspective, there is this burning question of why cities in particular. You know, why are we not talking about a destination, or why are we not talking about the whole nation? Or in some cases, there's the country of origin branding, say Swiss watches or Swiss chocolates, and so on. So the scale of cities and intensity of the dynamics existing within today's urban life and its influence on globalization is the key here. Because when we look at the urbanization, and the urban populations is increasingly growing, and we cannot just push this aside and oversimplify the promotion of the urban, because that's been one of the issues of branding perspective, that, you know, there's this approach of one formula fits all. So if one thing worked for a city, for one city, it would definitely work for another one. But obviously it doesn't work like that. So why cities in particular? From a geographical perspective, it's a place, or a city is a place that goes far beyond as mere existence of spatial science, borders and buildings, but it also emphasizes the assembly of connections and attachments that are under constant meaning construct, which this study looks at through and between people and places. We live in environments and we create bonds, and these bonds are not in a destinational matter, but more of a procedural matter. And from a sociological perspective, the impact of cities on human life and the citizens' social relatedness to the city is important, because when the physical environment is disordered, the social functions that it serves become harder to identify, which we see in many cities across the world now with the crises. So in this study, I focus on residents of all other possible stakeholders, such as businesses, governments, and individuals, and so on, because their relationship, association, and emotional ties are the key fuel to turn the city dynamic engine. From migration policies to spatial planning and the place attachment shape their behavior, attitude, and perception. And these are this group of stakeholders, residents, are the key reflectors of a city brand identity and the main storytellers of it. So what does this mean for, or what does this entail for migration and diversity? Some cities put their diversity at the core of their storytelling. And on a country level, we see this with Canada or with New Zealand. On a city level, we can look at New York, London, and the interesting case of Singapore. These cities do so, they put their diversity at the forefront by recognizing the diverse needs of their population. And while it is debatable whether they make their migrant history and current diversity work for them, they also align their social policies and administrative processes that cater to this diverse vision of the city, or at least that's what we see often. And however, there are some other cities such as, there are some other cities such as Tokyo, Paris, and Seoul that are relatively hesitant towards highlighting or putting migration at the background of their city brand identity. To some degree, Istanbul is in the same category with the general approach to branding efforts. For instance, Japan has recently taken baby steps to address this issue because it's not working for the economy. It's a very insular economy. And so they're addressing this issue by allowing, or rather opening up, estate markets to foreign buyers. Though this poses another problem because this is more so the case with the recently built luxury or ultra luxury high-rise buildings, which raises the question of diversity. You know, what kind of diversity we're talking here if you are only attracting a certain class or demographics of residents. Paris, it positions itself as a world city, but rather falls under the shadow of a difficult city to migrate to and to live in. Istanbul has a complex nature on its own and has been dealing with migration-related diversity for a long time. And on the other hand, there are other elements like national political debates and narratives shaping the spatial planning and including infrastructure. For instance, availability of contested urban spaces, such as mosques or Buddhist temples, or celebration of social mixing, such as multicultural festivals and holidays, limit this diversity or the welcomeness or welcome level of the city. Also, there's the idea of assimilationist policy approaches, like where the minority groups have to become the culture that they migrate to over time. So, my research focus actually started with, I wanted to understand cities, residents, and their meaning constructs with how they live and how they associate meanings to where they live. Because in traditional sense of branding, which is my background, if you don't like a product, you stop using it, or you go for a competitor and so on. Or if, say, somebody says, oh, I like this perfume on you, it smells really nice, you're more likely to buy it. But in terms of cities, it's way more sophisticated than a simple decision making. So that there's the intensity of emotional attachments, and sometimes this could be a disassociation of a place, of the place where you live as well. So I was just curious about how we construct meanings and what do they mean to us in our engagement and involvement of the place we live in. So this involved a qualitative grounded theory, and I adopted a constructivist approach. So I did my sampling accordingly, started with a few pilot studies, and this informed my future sampling. So it was the constant data collection, analysis straight away, and go back to data collection again. And eventually this led me to two deliberately contrasting cases, which I will discuss in a minute. I started with Leeds in the UK. It's the fourth, at this point at least, it's the fourth or third biggest city in the UK. And it is a post-industrial city, but now it is also housing the northern financial hub of the country. So I carried out in-depth interviews with the residents, and I chose my residents as over 18 years old and using the postcode system. Immediately data, so I analyzed the data immediately to guide further sampling. And this led me to looking at, which actually I will discuss in the analysis, but there were some meaning constructs that meant differently, and it led me to understand or want to understand how this might manifest itself in a different culture. So let's say in Leeds, seeing people around in the city late at night meant safety, whereas later on in Istanbul, I discovered that actually meant unknown chaos, or it definitely had a negative connotation to it. So why residents? Just to highlight that our self-identity is not only limited to the development of associations and distinctions between us and the others, but also its objects and the places that we're in. So it also, as much as it shapes, or as much as we shape a city brand identity, it also shapes us. So let's look at some excerpts from the Leeds interviews. Participant 1, a melting pot of cultures where, I went to school certainly around here. There was certainly no real form of racism. Well, what I'm talking about racism is never even come in equation. It wasn't like when I thought about every school I have ever been to has every form of it, the type of person in it. So there is a time frame to this, but growing up in an environment with different races, different ethnical and religious backgrounds shapes this person's attachment to the place. They further continue saying, you have got to think of some of the student population will be international students who come from quite wealthy cultures and maybe bring their children or partners with them. Therefore, they get brought into the culture. When you have got so much diversity going on, it breaks down any barriers. Therefore, you got a more diverse, wider range in area than you would impossibly anywhere else, certainly in the city, but anywhere else. So Leeds is actually a smaller, even though it's within the top 5 cities of the UK, but it's still a smaller city with two big universities, and there are issues with transient population, because most of the majority of the population is actually the population that comes and goes, that are students, but also they bring lots of diversity with them in terms of cultures, demographics, ethnical background, and so on. Participant 8 was talking about being brought up in an environment where it's normal to be involved in community, but also feeling connected to a place through getting involved and getting to know a diverse group of people. This again is tying us into how being involved with the community opens up doors to a diverse group of people in the neighborhood. And another participant was talking about being involved in a social mixing activity that's been put in initially, or that's been initiated by the local community members, but also then supported by the local governments. So it's a time and a place, a physical place, a social place for diverse group of people to mix, rather than having their own areas or live in their kind of specific neighborhoods. So this kind of shows us that it's a city, Leeds is a city where it's been fostering, or allowing at least, a platform where different opportunities, social and physical, to come together to allow this to happen. In Istanbul, it was rather interesting because people were talking about initially identifying others by their otherness. So participant 5 was talking about how they feel, what people wear, reveals about them, and how they could be in European style, using the public transportation and encountering people, but not too much of being an interaction. And participant 7 describes an area in Istanbul, Beşiktaş, that how they belong to, or how they feel they belong there, their sense of belonging, just by seeing different types of people, different a diverse group of people, that's what made them feel at home there. And lastly, my participant from Istanbul, they were a dual citizen, so Austrian and Turkish, and they were talking about actually on the political side of things, that the educational level that is being given by the wider government denies the children of today the chance to be world citizens and be a part of diverse environment, because of the regional segregations. And this, in Istanbul, at least manifests itself in terms of economic segregation. So the overall analysis and the synthesis of the data revealed a symbiotic and a fluid process between the identity of places and where they are mutually reliant and informing each other. And this mutual reliance was found to be a key outcome, as it drew the attention from static and formulated view of place identity to a more mutual creation perspective. So going back to when I mentioned the issues with the branding perspective on places, is if I don't know, building a £2 million water fountain feature in the center of the city will make it look nice and attract people, the next city or the neighboring city should do the same. This is a static view on place identity, that doesn't work. Involvement with a place and the community feeling played a key role in the relationship between identity and ownership, where there's a degree of representation and reflection of self and place, as well as interaction with different backgrounds and acceptance. So what do I mean by this? Place brand identity mosaic is a framework that gives city planners, managers, brand managers, and you'll be surprised to know by the majority of city governments now work with actually branding agencies, or either in-house or branding agencies in terms of a consultancy base. Anyway, this gives an insight of a dynamic of a symbiotic relationship of a place brand identity. The four core aspects are social process, sense of place, place attachment, and built environment. Rather than one formula fits all, this allows us to analyze a city's dynamics. Because not every city will prioritize place attachment through relatedness and pride. For instance, Londoners constantly complain about the weather, the irregular train and subway journeys, the experiences, their negative experiences of the city. Yet it is how people perceive themselves as living in London. So it's about their self-concept, how they perceive themselves is more dominant. In fact, this is the case with the majority of the mega cities. In traditional branding terms, there is no functional benefit, but a perception of the self-concept, how we see ourselves living in a specific geographical place. And just as the same for Leeds example that we just discussed, it's a city winning by its social process exchange through a sense of belongingness and involvement. So the city is fostering these elements, putting these elements at the forefront of their branding efforts. And they also apply it to their future vision as well. So what's all this mean for migration and diversity? Well, migration and diversity play different roles at different priority stages for different cities. In terms of city branding, while some cities are considered more diverse than others, this does not necessarily mean or reflect the reality in their branding efforts. So we talked about the examples of London and New York. They are incredibly diverse cities, yet they use the status to further their strategic economic and global growth rather than foster social inclusion in policymaking. Because, we look at New York, it's a migrant city, and same as London, yet their policies now, they're mostly national policies now, doesn't allow for this social inclusion. And such one-dimensional approaches in branding do cause long-term clashes in the basic sense of what is being promised, i.e. everyone is welcome, to what was delivered, we will deport you. And also some city dynamics signify their diverse status through the recognition and creation and celebration of diversity in order to multiply, while for others it signifies chaos and unknown and otherness. Just we talked about in the Leeds and Istanbul example, the multicultural social events charged by community power and fueled with the local government support, as well as the urban fabric in Leeds, enables for an active narrative of diversity. It's a celebration of it. They prioritize the social capital that's been generated by these communities, by the involvement within these communities, and allowing the new residents to engage in these activities. Meanwhile, in Istanbul, firstly, the urban structure doesn't allow it. The infrastructure doesn't allow it for an idealistic, inclusive form of urban life. the political discourse and economic structure distracts from creating a collectivity and social cohesion. It is, in fact, having the opposite effect of I am for myself. We are for ourselves, not for you. And city branding activities fostered a tone of further competition and differentiation. And this is due to such activities heavily relying on the promotion of urban restructuring, sales, and repurposing of the land. So we're talking about gentrification and urban redevelopment projects. What the future looks like. The potential issues of branding cities as diverse and migrant city is a similar problem to creating a one narrative for a place solely focusing on those elements. Just as, say, given the example of privatization of New York City, using that as the city's unique selling point and branding it. A city merely relying on its migrants as being migrant or diverse city do have the potential to cause social, political, and economic harm. How? Going back to the beginning of the cities are not one-dimensional, especially are now, more one-dimensional than before. So previous cities had a functional purpose, such as a trade or a port city or an industrial city. However, in the post-industrial era, and the time of the mega cities now do need to cater a diverse group of residents. And branding in its core, sadly, and truthfully, invites a transaction, an exchange through emotional connection. And what cities need is a balanced group of audiences, not just a primary target or a specific group of people. A city has to prioritize delivering its residents the basic needs of economy and social. Such approaches hinder the dynamic nature of cities and would hardly go beyond than just the slogan of "Welcome to this city." Yes, you can welcome them, but you need to provide them that environment as a city to multiply the diversity rather than suppress the diversity. And one last thing, a comprehensive approach to integrating diversity into city branding efforts calls for an alignment of political, spatial, social structures. And unless this parallel view exists, the city would suffer from further chaos, as we see some examples today. Thank you for your time, and I'm more than happy to welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Rüya. It was very interesting, and you kind of mixed the marketing background with the city branding and migration issue. Thank you so much. From the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to type in. Let's give the audience a few more minutes. Okay. maybe we can wait for the questions. So what's your strategy, Rüya, afterwards of this? Are you planning to expand on this or make it more connected to other migration aspects?
I guess it's a bit like a gift that keeps on giving, because it started with looking at cities as brands, or can we even perceive cities as brands, to, okay, let's understand the dynamics of what a city is. And then, talking about residents, you cannot exclude the questions of migration and diversity any longer, because they're also tying up to globalization. So the idea is to actually take this to a management level. So this was from a resident's perspective, and it will be interesting for me to actually carry out the research with the residents and with the city governments, the city managers of the same city, and see what are the perception of those two, and are they matching, and what are the gaps within that. Because the resident's identity, it's important for the resident's identity to feel somehow been matched with the city that they live in. And clearly there are lots of gaps in between in how we construct our meanings regarding to where we live. So
sounds very interesting. Yeah. We have a question from Birce Demir-Yontar. Do you have any data or views on how cities brand themselves with their universities as spaces for diverse education, for example, etc.? Because universities are linked to this diversity theme as well.
In Leeds, actually, yeah, because it's a relatively small city in terms of physical boundaries and in terms of, say, in comparison to Istanbul. But what they do is actually they use the student or the diverse student population to attract further students. And once they do that, the second stage is to actually provide employment opportunities. And that started with England moving their northern financial hub to Leeds. So that created employment opportunities for those students or graduates to actually find jobs and potentially stay in the area or in the neighboring areas. So in the case of Leeds, yeah, universities, the two big universities play a massive role in branding their city and creating this diversity.
Thank you. We have another question. Kyra Moslov asks, thank you for the interesting talk. You talked about this a bit, but maybe you can expand on it. Going forward, how we avoid tokenizing diversity, making migrants or ethnic diversity simply a tool for development. If a diversity is a draw for young people and creatives to a city, and perhaps that's the audience for these types of branding efforts, how do we avoid this leading to gentrification, dispossession, etc., and instead promote inclusive forms of growth?
That is a big question, because most cities are in rush to attract investment, and when they're in rush with that, they make decisions of often short term. So this is the same as in again branding terms. There was back in the early 2000s, there was the fashion of green marketing. Everything was environmentally friendly and everything was organic and this and that, to the point that people stopped believing it. It didn't mean anything anymore. And that's, I think, what with my research at least, I want to avoid that, because I don't want to just see a city labeling themselves as migrant or diverse city and not even providing that, or not even being anywhere near that, because again, that would involve creating an environment that would foster the diversity and feed into that, rather than create even further segregation. So in terms of that, I mean, place brand identity mosaic is one of the things that actually came up beautifully, because it just gives us a framework to see or to analyze what a particular city prioritizes with a strength, instead of saying, okay, well, I'm New York and I'm a migrant city and everyone can come here, but I will create chaos for them and I will make their lives hell for them. We need to, or city managers need to look at, and the local governments need to look at, what is the strength of their city and how they can kind of interweave diversity into this rather than just putting a label on it.
Thank you. Another question is from Konstantinos Karatsas. Congratulations for presentation. What are the main reasons that prevent a city from being diverse, even as a global attract like Paris? Political and economic, or more cultural? Question mark.
It's again a collective thing. It's the city needs to be open to the diversity itself, and this often starts with the political and the legal issues, and these narratives are reflected in the cultural elements as well. I mean, there are the issues, say the Turkish migrants in Germany. The politics have heavily influenced the cultural narrative towards Turkish migrants, and it's the same probably Moroccan migrants in France and so on. So there is a cultural element to it, but the politics and the global politics is affecting this. I mean, in Turkey, we have the same thing against Syrian migrants. There is a cultural narrative that people need to see incentive from up above, meaning, you know, the political incentive or encouragement to overcome those narratives. And instead, in a city like Istanbul, it's been the opposite. Everyone is kind of trying to grab their own piece of land. And it's creating a further segregation rather than a cohesion.
Mm-hmm. I don't see any other questions. Do you have concluding comments or what?
No, I hope I've given a soft side of branding, because I've been the devil's advocate in branding by constantly defending the residents' perspective in, you know, what we are branding or trying to brand here, and always gone against the promotional and imagery and the logos and the slogans and so on. That they're just, yes, they're a part of it, but they're short-term outcomes, or that they are short-lived. So hopefully I can give both sides of the story.
Thank you very much, Rüya. It was very informative. It's always good to have studies from different disciplines as well, connecting it to migration area. Thank you for being with us today, and
so much.
Take care, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today, and have a good day. Bye.